Hi, friends. Welcome to our first EDOW Roundtable. My name is Jason Evans, and I'm the Young Adult Missioner for the Episcopal Diocese of Washington. Today, I'm joined by three other members of the diocesan mission team. Well, we're hoping three, at least two right now. If you would, please introduce yourselves and tell us what you do here at Church House. Paula, would you mind going first?
Oh, no, not at all. It's my pleasure. I'm Paula Clark, and my title is Canon for Clergy Development and Multicultural Ministry, which means that I oversee all of the discernment process for persons who are seeking ordained ministry, either the priesthood or the diaconate. I also work with clergy who are already ordained, both as they're seeking to find positions within the Diocese of Washington or transitioning out of the Diocese of Washington. And most important, that clergy development portion of my position, I work with priests and other ordained people, so also those in the vocational diaconate, who are interested in improving, refining their skills in leadership, especially as we're facing some of the challenges in the church that we're talking about today, which brings me to my position in multicultural ministries. What we found that the church of now and in the future is very multicultural, and as we seek to define what that means and how we reflect the people of God in the world, I am working specifically with all of our congregations, and especially those who are very multicultural in makeup, to seek how we can deepen our relationships, broaden our relationships, and as well make ministry vital and exciting during this especially exciting time in our history of the church. And so that's what I do. What that means is still evolving, and that's part of our discussion today.
That's right. And Iman, how about you?
So my name is Iman Green, and I'm the youth missioner for the Diocese of Washington. And so that means I go into different congregations and help them with vitality of youth and family ministries. And I also help to run Camp EDOW and looking at programmatic and diocesan-led events for youth and families.
Sure. Simon Bautista Betances, Latino missioner for the diocese, and also serving the Latino ministry at Church of St. Albans and Church of Our Savior.
Great. Well, again, thanks to all three of you now for being a part of this. For those watching, if you've participated in these conversations in the past, you'll notice that this month our format is changing. Previously, these Hangouts have focused on issues that relate to young adult ministries, and this month we're trying something a little different. We'll continue our monthly conversations, but we'll look at issues from a variety of perspectives, not just 20 and 30-somethings. Today, we're talking about race and culture. If you'd like to participate in the conversation, you can email questions and comments to roundtable@edow.org, or you can tweet them with the hashtag EDOW Roundtable, all one word. Simone, I think you might want to turn the volume down on your speakers, because you're getting a lot of static coming out.
It's better now?
That's good. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Last Friday, Presiding Bishop Catherine Jeffords Shorey hosted a forum from the Diocese of Mississippi entitled 50 Years Later, The State of Racism in America. And following the simulcast, the Bishop of Washington, Reverend Mary Ann Edgar-Buddy, and Dean of the National Cathedral, Reverend Gary Hall, moderated a local conversation on the subject. I'd like to begin by getting each of your thoughts and responses to the forum. I know that for myself, the most important conversations, before we get into that, let's just take a couple minutes to share some general responses to the forum. Paula, would you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. I really appreciated the forum, both the two panels from the Diocese of Mississippi, as well as the presiding bishop's keynote address, as well as that video that they had, which started out. Because this forum was 50 years later, it was good to talk about and frame the conversation of racism from a historical standpoint. And heaven knows that Mississippi was a hotbed of those discussions 50 years ago. And so having people like Myrlie Evers Williams, Bishop Curry, having Ray Suarez moderate the panel, as well as former Governor Winter, put it in a historical context that was valuable. Mm-hmm. But I, to be honest, was very pleased that we had an opportunity live and in person to respond to that, which we had taken a look at. I think it was very courageous for the diocese to come together, and I thank Bishop Buddy for that, to have honest, true conversation about race and cultural issues. And so while it was just a first step, I think it was an important step as we deal with very important issues which have to do with race and culture. So I was greatly appreciative of our time together on Friday.
Yeah. And Simone, you were part of the panel. What were your thoughts walking away from the forum last Friday?
Pretty much that this is a conversation to be continued.
Yes.
It's pretty much one of my first thoughts when I, step out of the cathedral that day. That it has to be more inclusive and a more, let's say, wide conversation, not only in terms of participants, but also in terms of the issues that we really need to name and to put our fingers on them. And another thought pretty much is, we cannot continue moving forward as a church. And I heard that clear, not only from the panel, the two panels that we heard of at the cathedral in Mississippi, is that right? But also, I heard that clear from the panelists at our place here, that we can now continue moving forward as a church pretending that everything is just fine.
Yeah. Iman, you watched online. What were your thoughts?
So it was so good to hear the simulcast that happened in Mississippi, and also the one that the diocesan office did. For me, it was a great perspective into history and learning about history and culture that happened in those areas, and part of our own history, and then also seeing what can we do to move forward in terms of after 50 years later. What are we as young people? What are we as the Diocese of Washington? What are we called to moving forward into engaging in race and culture? And so that was just eye-opening for me in terms of hearing the history, hearing what people's perspectives on it. And I resonated well with Bishop Curry in talking about, I think his quote was, not going to let our addiction determine our future, was his quote that he said. And I just love that quote about just how do we take from what we've had in the past and learn and move forward in terms of engaging race and culture moving forward.
Yeah. It definitely felt like that was where it ended, was what are the next steps, and that is yet to be answered. I know that for myself, some of the most important conversations I've had on the subject of race and culture have occurred in two places. In the local worshiping community within a congregation, and at home with my family, with my wife and my 3 kids. I'm wondering what thoughts do each of you have concerning race and culture as it relates to some of the most tangible, practical spaces we occupy in life, which would be the parish and the home. What do you think congregations and households should be considering when it comes to this subject? Anybody want to go first?
I'll jump in. I feel very strongly about parishes taking the lead in conversations where race and culture are concerned, but from a proactive standpoint, so that when issues come up that are justice issues, that the church is proactive in not just responding, but getting ahead of the curve. And so where I think Bishop Curry put it in the context of the isms all move forward on the same train.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't do a discussion on injustice in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the church is in the perfect position to be able to engage those in a comfortable and conscientious and intentional way. A recent study that was put out, I think 2006, said that the deepest way to talk about experience and have long-lasting relationships among cultures is within the church. And we're able to do that within the church because we are in places of vulnerability and working alongside one another, etc. And so the opportunity for us to get together as the people of God and really embrace issues of social justice and really understand where the other is, respecting the dignity of every human being, needs to be part of our culture, part of our mantra, our way of doing church on an ongoing basis. And then, of course, the family is supportive of that because discussions, how you live and move and have your being are in the context of the house. And so during the panel discussion, I believe Byron Rushing spoke about the fact that racism is a learned behavior. I certainly believe that it's a cultural sin that we have, and so there was some discussion about that. But certainly there is learned behavior, and if it's a learned behavior, it's important that the household, on a constant basis, show forth itself as being embracing of all of God's people in thought, word, and deed. And so the household has to reinforce that so that we can bring forward a people who truly respect the dignity of every human being.
Yeah. Iman, what are your thoughts in relation to that on the parish level and the household level? You know, you've just recently started, but you're working with family and youth ministries. What thoughts do you have in regards to that?
Yeah, so as Paula has mentioned in terms of making the family a place where it's, I would even say, a teachable moment in terms of when situations do come up or when situations do arrive, how do we create those teachable moments in turn and showing young people, the family, the parishes, how do we respond to those who have injustice? What does it mean to be aware of who we are around and how we engage other people in their life, and not just the people that we feel so comfortable with. So and so I think parishes from the rector on down, talking to families and people in their congregants or in their parishes, talking about what does it mean to engage a culture in 2013 with so many different perspectives and so many different dynamics, so many different races. How do we engage that and have honest conversations about what that means to be a Christian in 2013 and to make it really the kingdom of God, which represents so many different aspects than just the person that looks like you.
Yeah. And you know, Paula, you've talked about that whether or not our congregations or our families are multiculturalism is the context within which we do ministry. It is it is the culture at large that is multicultural, and so it's something that we all have to address.
Absolutely.
It's not just one particular segment of our culture any longer. Simone, what thoughts do you have in regards to that? When we're thinking about this in relation to the local parish, when we're thinking about this in relation to the household, what ought we be thinking about?
When I move around as an individual, I definitely need to be constantly aware that 1, I am Black, 2, I am Latino. So somehow, believe it or not, accept it or not, be totally consciously of that, I am carry on to minority of my skin, to minority groups in my skin. And it's difficult to really move around with that without being aware and be able to read signs of when one of these two is being target or object of any kind of discrimination or prejudice. But let me just briefly, in the context of household and home, let me just tell you just a brief story of something that just happened recently. I was taking my son to his wrestling practice at his school. He's a wrestler. He's a 17-year-old young man. And we needed to stop by a supermarket, Giant. He needed to buy a few stuffs he needed to take with him. He came back kind of mad and angry because he needed to wait longer on the line because of they were an African individual who did not know how to make the line or speed to go pay, and there was a Latino who could not figure it out before getting to the counter that he needed to get something else. So he put his stuffs on the table and went back to pick up something. He was mad and said, why is it that Latinos and African don't never learn the things right? And that was my son. My own son, making a statement that to me sounded very prejudiced. And I stopped him and I said, hold on, Simon. Just wait a second. Can you think again of what you're saying? Because what you're saying is pretty much what I've been listening all the way through from people who are very anti-immigrant and racist. And I know that you don't want to say that. This is what you hear. So sometimes a lot of what you hear around is contagious.
Yes.
And prejudice is contagious. And racism, even if you are even part of the minority that is rejected for the color, you can become also one of these people that think the same way. So my point for him is think about it before you even say it, and let's have that conversation later. So we did.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That seems right on, that idea that this is contagious.
Yes.
Nobody, all of us are broken people, and we can make that mistake. I have a question that I would like to run by all of you before we get to the end of this brief chat. In the forum, there was definitely a lot of reflection on personal experience. A lot of the panelists, both at the National Symposium in Mississippi and the local conversation, were people that had experienced racism in a very palpable, real way 50 years ago in the United States. And you could feel the pain, and you could feel the frustration, even as it was named a couple of times, anger at what had happened. And I know for a lot of white folks sitting in there, they can easily go to the place of feeling guilty for being white. And I know for some people that shuts them down pretty quickly. Because I remember when my life began to intersect with a more multicultural reality, living in the city, that I had seasons where I became more aware of the history of races in this country, the history of having grown up in San Diego, California, the history of what Anglos had done to Latinos in relation to the border and immigration, and it can cause a lot of people to disengage quickly. How would you respond to that? I know how I would respond and how I try to engage folks around that. But what are your thoughts when you hear that? How do you respond to that?
I'll jump in there. I like to quote King, who says, "Just injustice anywhere deeply affects justice everywhere." And so I've grown to appreciate that anytime you see injustice, it affects us all. And we're all intertwined in the difficulties that any what we're calling one group face. Although I'm looking at Simone, who, you know, falls into other categories. I have friends who are lesbian, Black women, so there you go, triple threat there. But the fact is that I think that the time for guilt is past, and I think for standing up for justice, whenever we see injustice, whenever we encounter injustice, is the place for us to all start and address. Because I think the issues that we are all facing, the gun violence, the high level of incarceration, poverty, adversely affects us all. And so as we recognize that we all are stakeholders, that place of guilt is a place that we acknowledge this happened, but it's time to move forward and take action.
Yeah. Thoughts from Iman or Simone? Thoughts on that from either of you?
I'll let Simone go first.
Okay. One of the things that I admired deeply of Oscar Arnulfo Romero, this Archbishop of El Salvador, assassinated back to 1980,
Yes.
is that he constantly called the soldiers who he knew were killing his people and his priests. He constantly called them brothers and sisters. And he was a kind of person that always said, we need to make it all together to heaven, so stop doing this. So when the issue of injustice in one hand, or discrimination that goes by the hand with injustice appear, we need to find the way to still keep looking at each other as brothers and sisters.
Yes.
And I know that it might be hard when you suffer in your own skin and in your own being. Discrimination from any direction. It's sometimes difficult to identify the brother of yours that is right in front of you. But we are, I believe, a people of the promise. And a people of the promise that need to pull together to make it to that land of promise.
Wow. Thank you. Thanks to all three of you. It's just about time for us to wrap up this month's conversation. I'd like to end with some closing words from each of you. What thoughts or recommendations would you like to leave people with? Iman, let's start with you.
Okay. Yeah, I would, to tag team with what Simone just said, though, I think it calls us into a deeper relationship with Christ, to love one another where we are and where other people are at in their lives, regardless if we see eye to eye on certain things, irregardless if we see eye to eye on certain things, that we are called to love one another, and we are called to action in terms of justice, regardless of where it lies on our justice scale of what we think is injustice or not. We are called to look at that. And so anyway, my recommendation for youth and families in that regard is to find the teachable moments that we can teach young people, young children in our parishes, in our home life, that we can point out to them, because I think a lot of it is that for my age, we probably will say we don't experience racism until we have an encounter. We have to face it ourselves. So how do we have those teachable moments for young people and show them that, you know, this is not right. This is what is right, kind of thing. I think also on the curriculum side of things, there's a curriculum out at BTS that does talk about diversity, talks about race, talks about culture, and I think it's called the Episcopal Youth Curriculum that BTS has put out. And so I would go on there and look at that, those kind of things. There's another book by Alvin Saunders called Bridging the Diversity Gap. that I was reading this past weekend. And Dr. Randy Tessa mentioned Mighty Times, the short films, and he also mentioned, I think, Amazing Grace and The Butler. Again, those are those movies that we see on a constant basis, especially since we're in social media land so much, is that we have teachable moments in these kinds of things that we can talk about in terms of history, in terms of moving forward. What are we called to do now, and what are we called to do in the future?
Right. Thank you. Simone, how about you?
One of the positive things, something that is going on right now in Dominican Republic, in terms of denying citizenship to the thousands of Dominicans born of Haitian origin. One of the positive outcomes of all this that is happening is that has brought many of us Dominicans to really have the conversation about this, to talk the conversation. So I believe that, having the conversation, naming the issues, making, even if it is only small, commitments and resolutions around it, might be a step forward to really, overcome the issue.
Thank you. And Paula, what would you like to leave folks with?
I would like to just encourage our continued efforts where race and culture are concerned, to embrace the beauty of our multicultural society at this juncture, and to moreover stand up for justice wherever. I think it is a courageous act to deal honestly and openly with differences in race and culture, and I just implore everyone to have the vision and the courage to speak up as issues arise, to have the honest conversations in the household, in the parish, and on our in the larger context, so that as we together, as the people of God, move forward, we'll be able to really enjoy the reign of God, of people of all races, cultures, creeds, and tongues. And so I look forward to the future work that we're going to be embarking upon, and invite people's ideas and thoughts about how to move forward.
Great. On that note of the conversation piece, a great book by two theologians that have some affiliation with my alma mater, Fuller Seminary. Glenn Stosson and David Gushee wrote a book called Kingdom Ethics. And in relation to racism, one of the things that they say there is one of the most powerful things we can do is to actually sit down and share our stories with each other. And that it is in that we find our common humanity, our common bond, and we find the gospel pulling us constantly to the other, and seeking good news in the lives of other people. I would leave people too with two resources that I have really appreciated and found pretty formative for myself. The Christian Imagination by Willie James Jennings is a great book that is theological, that is historical, and is just a great read. It's dense, it's big, but it's worth it. And the other book is Radical Welcome by Stephanie Spellers.
That's a great one.
That's a good,
practical, and is not particularly related to one particular group, but whoever is the other in your circle, and how does the gospel and the call of the church draw us towards that person and invite them into the Christian community. So those are my recommendations. Thanks to each of you for participating in this, and thanks to those of you that have been participating online. You can join us next month for our Advent EDOW Roundtable. We'll be talking about giving on Tuesday, December 17th at 1:00 p.m. And you can watch on YouTube at youtube.com/EDOW videos. If you would like to get in touch with any of us, you can find out how at edow.org/contacts. You'll find all our contact information there. Thanks again for joining the conversation, and we'll see you next month.